She was smiling from my porch like she owned the place, because apparently she sold it while I was gone. The cops were already there to remove me. Everyone thought I was done for. But what none of them knew was that the real deed was never in my name to begin with. And that wasn't even the real trap. I wish I could say this was some dramatic misunderstanding, that I came back from vacation to find a clerical error or a paperwork mix-up. But no. This was all Karen. HOA president, walking caricature of suburban tyranny, wielding her clipboard like a scepter and treating every lawn flamingo like a personal insult. I was gone 6 weeks. Off the grid, backpacking the Rockies, no cell service, no Wi-Fi, just peace and pine trees. And while I was out hugging trees and not thinking about property lines, Karen apparently decided that my house looked a little too unoccupied for her liking. So there I stood, duffel bag still slung over my shoulder, watching a family I'd never seen before carry boxes into my living room while Karen sipped a mimosa from a cup that said, "Boss Babe." The police had already been called, by her, obviously, and were explaining, very politely, that according to the papers she showed them, this was now her property. Or, technically, the property of the nice couple she sold it to. That's when it hit me. She actually believed she'd pulled it off. She thought I'd come home, be confused, maybe even angry, but then disappear. Vanish in shame while she pocketed the profit and added another bullet point to her suburban conquest resume. And the scary part? She'd probably gotten away with something like this before. That smug little smile on her face didn't come from trying this once. It came from repeating it. I didn't yell. I didn't protest. I just looked her dead in the eye, tilted my head slightly, and said, "Did you go in the basement?" She blinked, confused for half a second, then smirked. "You mean the storage closet with all the old junk?" "Yes, we cleared that out days ago. There was a safe, but it was empty." Then she leaned in with a condescending whisper. "You really should take better care of your things, sweetheart." Ah yes, the sweetheart, the last dying breath of a Karen who thinks she's one. The cops, still thinking this was some unfortunate mess, asked me if I had proof of ownership. I told them no. Not directly. Not anymore. I told them if they wanted to look into the title history, they'd find something interesting, but that wouldn't matter today. What I really needed was a place to put my duffel bag, so I turned and walked down the street to Ms. Randall's house. Ms. Randall was 82, sharp as a tack, and had been watching the circus unfold from her porch with a glass of sweet tea and a pair of binoculars like it was Sunday football. "Did she really just evict you from your own house?" she asked as I sat down on her porch swing. "No," I said, smiling. "She evicted herself. She just doesn't know it yet. 3 months ago, Karen wasn't even on the board. She was just the loud neighbor with too many opinions and not enough hobbies. But then Mr. Harmon, the former HOA president, had a heart attack and stepped down. Karen saw her opening and slithered in with promises of restoring order and elevating community standards. Within weeks, she had new bylaws passed, all conveniently targeting non-conforming elements. Translation: people she didn't like. I was the first target. My grass was too long. My fence was the wrong shade of brown. My truck didn't fit the aesthetic. Every week, a new fine. Every week, a new violation letter. She was trying to wear me down. But here's the thing about me, and I say this with full humility, I'm extremely petty when I need to be. And I knew exactly how to out-Karen a Karen. Before I left for my trip, I'd already started prepping. Call it paranoia, call it instinct. I'd moved all my legal documents into a private storage unit. I'd rerouted mail to a P.O. box in another city. Most importantly, the property deed wasn't under my name anymore. Hadn't been for almost 2 years. It was transferred to a family trust, one with built-in safeguards, layered in legal armor, and overseen by a real estate attorney who absolutely lives to destroy HOAs in court. You know, just in case. Back then, it felt like overkill. Now it felt like sweet, slow-cooked justice. Karen thought I was just some techie burnout with a taste for solitude. What she didn't know was that I used to work in cybersecurity, specifically fraud detection. I know how scams are built and, more importantly, how they unravel. So while she was playing checkers with fake deeds and shady notaries, I was playing 4D chess with timestamps, email trails, and hidden cameras. Yes, hidden cameras. Inside the house, outside, and, this is my favorite part, in the basement, right where the empty safe used to sit. She triggered the sensor the moment she opened it. The footage was already backed up in 4 places before she even called the movers. The worst part, if I had to guess, is that she truly believed she'd found a loophole. A little-known HOA clause allowed them to reclaim visibly abandoned homes after a certain period. Of course, she neglected to actually follow the legal steps to prove abandonment. And even if she had, it wouldn't matter. The trust that owned the house wasn't dormant. It had been paying taxes, utilities, even made a donation to a local animal shelter last month. Not abandoned. Not even close. Back on the porch with Ms. Randall, I could hear the moving truck's beep as it backed into my driveway. The young couple unloading furniture had no idea what they'd walked into. I didn't blame them. They were victims just like me. No, the blame was all on Karen. And she was about to learn exactly how badly she'd messed with the wrong house. I pulled out my phone, opened my encrypted file app, and hit send on 3 emails. 1 to my attorney, 1 to the county assessor's office, and 1 to a local real estate fraud investigator I'd met at a tech conference 2 years ago. The best part? I wasn't even going to stop her. Not yet. Let her believe she'd won. Let her paint the walls, change the locks, make TikToks about manifesting abundance. I'd give her a few more days, enough rope to hang herself with style. Then I'd pull the rug out so fast she wouldn't know which way was up. I watched as Karen walked out to the street to take a selfie in front of the house with her "sold" sign. She even used a sparkle filter. The audacity was impressive, honestly. But that's when I noticed something that made me pause. She wasn't alone. Behind her, in the background of the selfie, stood a man I didn't recognize. Tall, in a gray blazer, holding a manila folder and looking directly at me. And he was smiling. I didn't recognize him, but that smile wasn't friendly. It was calculated. He wasn't looking at Karen. He was looking at me. And suddenly, this wasn't just a Karen power trip anymore, it was something bigger. The man in the gray blazer nodded once, tucked the folder under his arm, and turned back toward the house like he already knew how the ending of this story played out. For the first time, I felt the tiniest flicker of unease. Karen was a nuisance, sure, but this guy? This guy had the posture of someone who owned chessboards, not just played on them. And if he was involved, then either Karen was being used, or she was smarter than I'd given her credit for. Either way, it added a new complication. And I don't like complications unless I'm the one writing them. I spent the rest of that day quietly. No social media posts, no fiery confrontations. Let them settle in. Let them hang curtains and fill drawers. I made a couple of calls, not to start the war, but to prepare the ammunition. My attorney, Lou, was already giddy. He's the kind of guy who doesn't blink at 3-inch thick housing code violations. When I explained the situation, fraudulent sale, forged documents, HOA president impersonating ownership rights, he actually cackled. Lou doesn't cackle. Give it 3 days, he said. Let them paint something. Then we go scorched earth. The next morning, I took a walk around the neighborhood. I wasn't trying to be stealthy, just casual. Observing. Karen had always been the type to smile through her fangs, but this time she was practically radiating smugness. She waved at me from my old driveway like we were besties. "Oh, you're still around?" she chirped. "Hope you're finding somewhere comfortable to stay." I gave her a nod and kept walking. No reason to bark when the bite was coming. What I noticed as I moved through the neighborhood was more telling. People avoided eye contact. Some waved awkwardly. Others peeked through blinds like I was a ghost. Karen had clearly spun a story. Abandonment, some legal technicality, maybe even hinted that I was unstable. It was the classic Karen playbook: control the narrative first, bury the truth later. But there were cracks in the illusion. Old Mrs. Randall, who'd seen everything from her porch, wasn't buying the PR. Neither was Greg, the mechanic 2 doors down who once helped me fix my breaker box during a storm. He came out to get the mail and gave me a stiff nod, like he didn't know whose side to stand on, but was ready to switch if the tide turned. I spent the afternoon reviewing the footage again. The camera in the basement had caught Karen and a locksmith breaking into the safe. She'd squealed with delight when she found the documents: old titles, personal records, a few decoy investment papers. She didn't know they were fakes, created on my old work laptop with just enough formatting errors to catch a legal eye. She even waved one around like a trophy. The locksmith looked nervous. That part was key, because nervous accomplices talk fast when subpoenas hit. Then there was the paperwork trail. Karen had used a notary service, one of those traveling ones that doesn't ask too many questions, to legitimize the fake deed transfer. The notary, a woman named Angela, had been paid in cash and hadn't even required ID. Classic shortcut. I sent that information to Lou, who started tracing the cash withdrawal to Karen's personal account. Sloppy Karen. She'd gone for fast and easy. But fast and easy doesn't hold up in court. What did concern me, though, was the presence of the man in the blazer. I still didn't have a name, but I had a blurry photo I snapped while pretending to text. Facial recognition turned up nothing. No social media presence, no public real estate license. A ghost. Which meant he was either someone very private or someone with connections powerful enough to scrub their digital trail. I sent the image to an old friend from my cybersecurity days, someone who owed me a favor and had access to databases that made the government look like amateurs. He didn't promise anything, just said, "I'll see what sticks. But if you're poking into something serious, tread lightly." That night, I stayed at a cheap motel off the highway. It smelled like bleach and old regrets, but it had working Wi-Fi and privacy. I needed to think. Karen had overreached, sure, but what if she wasn't working alone? What if this guy in the blazer had bigger plans? Maybe she was just a pawn in something messier. Real estate scams aren't new. Some HOAs get cozy with shady developers, flipping distressed properties under legal loopholes, reselling them for profit, and silencing anyone who complains. It was possible my property wasn't just a lucky grab, it was targeted. On the third day, I went back to the neighborhood just as the moving truck pulled up again. Karen was supervising like a royal inspector, clipboard in hand, barking orders at the movers. The couple who had bought the house looked overwhelmed. The husband, Mike, if I remembered right, kept checking his phone. His wife, Ellie, looked ready to cry. That was when I made my move. I walked up slowly, casually, and said, "Hey, mind if I ask you guys a quick question?" They flinched. Karen immediately inserted herself like a human firewall. "You're not allowed on this property. I'll call the police again." Mike looked confused. "Wait, I thought you said he was gone." Karen hissed through her teeth. "He doesn't own anything here. He's trespassing." I ignored her and looked at Ellie. "Did she tell you why the price was so low? Or that the home was abandoned? Did she give you the title paperwork before the purchase?" Mike's phone buzzed. He looked down and frowned. "No, actually, we didn't get the full deed package yet. She said it was in processing." I nodded. "It's not in processing. It doesn't exist. Because she never had legal ownership." Karen turned on me, face red. "You have no proof of that. This is just harassment." I smiled. "Not harassment. Just a friendly warning. You bought a stolen house. And there's a fraud investigation starting next week. You might want to reconsider moving those boxes in." Ellie looked like she might throw up. Mike stepped back from the porch. Karen started yelling at me, but I was already walking away. I didn't need to convince them. The seed was planted. They'd do their own digging now. And when they found out they'd been scammed, they'd flip on Karen faster than you could say civil liability. But that night, as I was organizing my files and preparing the next legal strike, I got an unexpected email from my friend in cyber forensic. It was a single line, no subject, no pleasantries. Do not mess with this guy. He's not just real estate. He used to run offshore identity operations in Miami. Real quiet now, but connected. Attached was a photo of the man in the blazer. This time, not in my driveway. This time, standing next to a senator. And smiling. It should have unsettled me more than it did, seeing a photo of that man shaking hands with a senator, both smiling like they hadn't just upended a stranger's life. But to be honest, it didn't feel new. It felt like confirmation. I knew from the moment I saw that man on my porch that this wasn't just about Karen. She was too loud, too sloppy. Someone with Blazer Guy's background didn't align himself with amateur con artists unless there was a larger play. And if offshore identity operations and real estate fraud were just his warm-up acts, I had to assume I was dealing with something much more entrenched, much more dangerous, and that made things even more fun. See, the difference between a Karen and a criminal network is that Karens care about appearances. But real players? They care about outcome. And the second they think their outcome is threatened, they get sloppy too. They act fast. And when people act fast, they leave footprints. All I had to do was guide them to panic just a little. That's why I spent the next 48 hours doing the one thing Karen never expected from me. Absolutely nothing. I didn't call the cops. I didn't file a motion. I didn't post on social media. I didn't even walk past the house. I became invisible, silent. And in the absence of noise, paranoia started eating away at them. On the morning of day 5, my attorney Lou called. He sounded half annoyed, half impressed. You know, he said, most people in your position would be camped outside the courthouse by now with pitchforks. I told him that's exactly what they were expecting. Then I asked if he had anything on the notary yet. Lou laughed. Oh yeah. She's real. Name's Angela Moreno. Did 3 house transfers in the last 4 months, all in HOA communities, all for cash, and all with buyers that don't exist anymore. Wanna guess who hired her every time? I didn't have to guess. It was always Karen. Or someone using her as a puppet. Lou had already filed the preliminary injunction and had it ready to drop the moment I gave the word. But I didn't give it. Not yet. Because while Lou was digging through legal paperwork, I was going deeper. I wanted to know why my house, specifically. Why this neighborhood? It wasn't high value. Middle tier, quiet, aging infrastructure. Nothing remarkable. And that's when it clicked. That was the point. Unremarkable properties don't get attention when they change hand. They don't trigger real estate watch lists or city audit. They're safe. Boring. The perfect kind of asset to move money through if, say, you wanted to launder large sums without government scrutiny. My house wasn't a prize. It was a filter. A funnel. And Karen had been playing gatekeeper. The gray blazer guy. His name was still elusive, but I had a few working aliases now. Didn't need my house. He needed access to a title that could be flipped, sold, and processed in clean transactions. Probably overseas. Probably through dummy corporations. The only problem was, my property wasn't actually owned by me, and it was locked in a trust with layers he didn't know about. That made me a loose end. One Karen thought she could tie up with her clipboard and fake forms. One he assumed wouldn't bite back. But I had teeth. And I was just getting warmed up. By the end of the week, the new owners of my house, Mike and Ellie, were starting to unravel. Mike had gone from confused to furious. I'd seen him pacing the driveway, phone glued to his ear, shouting into the receiver. Ellie avoided eye contact now, like she knew they were in deep water and didn't know how to swim. I felt for them. They'd been sold a fantasy, and now the cracks were spreading fast. I sent them an anonymous tip through a burner email with attachments. Real property history, forged documents, the trust filing, the footage of Karen breaking into the basement safe. No threats, no demands. Just the truth. They could make their own decision about what to do with it. 12 hours later, I saw the moving truck come back. This time, things were being taken out of the house. Karen stood on the porch shouting, trying to keep them inside. Mike slammed the door of the truck and drove off without a word. Ellie didn't even look back. Now it was just Karen again. Queen of the empty castle. Except now the castle wasn't just empty, it was radioactive. That night, I finally gave Lou the green light. Within 12 hours, he filed the injunction with the county, triggering an automatic freeze on any transfers or claims related to the trust's property. By the next morning, Karen received a court summons, delivered by a process server dressed like a pizza guy. She opened the door expecting lunch, and got served instead. According to Lou, she tried to slam the door and scream harassment. It didn't work. The court date was set for a week later, but the real fun began the moment the news broke. A local journalist who covered real estate corruption picked up the filing, noticed the keywords, fraud, forged notary, HOA abuse, and published a short article titled, HOA President Accused of Selling Occupied Home While Owner Was Camping. It wasn't even front-page stuff, but Reddit found it. And when Reddit finds something like that, it spreads like wildfire. Within hours, Karen's name was trending on a local subreddit. Someone posted her Facebook profile. Another found a video from the day I returned, where she was caught on film saying the house was abandoned and that she'd acquired it fair and square. That video alone got 400,000 views in 2 days. Neighbors who had previously avoided me started calling, texting, even apologizing. One of the board members who resigned when Karen took over sent me copies of old emails. Emails where Karen had explicitly talked about using abandonment codes to clean up the street. That's what she called it. Cleaning up. Like the rest of us were dust on her perfectly power-washed fantasy. The night before the hearing, I parked a block away and watched from the shadows as Karen stood in the yard on the phone, pacing. She was yelling again. At who, I don't know. Maybe the Blazer Man. Maybe no one. But she looked shaken. Hair frizzy. Eyes wide. Her armor was cracking. And then something strange happened. Another car pulled up. Not a cop, not a city official. A black SUV. Tinted windows. Clean, quiet. The driver stepped out, another suit. Not Blazer Man, but same vibe. He handed her something in an envelope. She looked at it, then looked back at him like she'd just swallowed glass. Whatever was in that envelope, it wasn't good news. He didn't say a word. Just got back in the SUV and left. Karen stood in the driveway, frozen. I watched her for a while. Then I left. The next morning, I arrived at court with Lou calm, ready. Karen was already there, wearing a blazer of her own and too much makeup, like she thought she could powder over fraud. She barely looked at me. But I looked at her. Closely. Something had shifted. She didn't look smug anymore. She looked scared. When the judge entered and called the case, Lou stood up and said, "Your Honor, before we begin, we have new evidence to present. Evidence that may expand the scope of this case." And I knew, right then, that Karen wasn't just going to lose her house. She was going to lose everything. The courtroom was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers as Lou handed the judge the new evidence. Karen's lawyer, some jittery HOA-hired suit with a Bluetooth earpiece still dangling from his ear, tried to object before even knowing what it was. The judge raised one eyebrow, looked down at the file, and waved for him to sit down. The folder contained everything: the forensics trail of the altered deed, a notarized affidavit from the notary admitting she was paid in cash and pressured to sign without verification, and the surveillance footage of Karen breaking into the safe. And then, tucked neatly in the back, the most damning piece of all: a financial ledger showing Karen had accepted 2 separate payments from 2 different buyers for the same property. One of those buyers was Mike. The other? A corporate entity with an offshore account tied back to none other than our friend in the gray blazer. Karen's face drained color like someone had pulled her plug. She glanced around the room like a kid caught cheating on a test, eyes darting for any possible escape hatch. But there weren't any. Not this time. The judge didn't say much at first. Just read the papers. Then he leaned back and said in that slow, judicial tone that's somehow more terrifying than yelling, "This is no longer a simple civil dispute. Ms. Holbrook, you may want to retain separate counsel immediately. There may be criminal charges pending." Lou leaned over to me and whispered, "She's going to need a lawyer with better hair." I almost laughed. Almost. The hearing itself only lasted 20 minutes after that. The judge issued an immediate order reversing the sale, recognizing the trust as the sole and legal owner, and freezing all HOA-controlled assets pending investigation. That last part was poetic. The HOA's accounts, savings, petty cash, frozen solid. Karen tried to argue that she wasn't acting alone, that she was being misled by others, but the judge cut her off and told her any such claims would be more appropriate in her criminal defense hearing. He gave her a number for the public defender's office. That stung. We walked out of the courthouse into a mild breeze and the scent of spring rain on the asphalt. Lou slapped me on the back and said, "You want celebratory tacos, or should we wait until she's officially indicted?" I told him we'd wait. I still wasn't done. Karen might have been the public face of the scam, but Blazer Man was still out there. Quiet, calculating, and, so far, untouched. And I don't like when people walk away clean after trying to burn down my life. The local news didn't wait, though. The same journalist who had picked up the story earlier was there with a cameraman. He caught us as we left the courthouse and asked if I had any comment for the community. I smiled and said, "Maybe it's time HOAs stop treating people like renters in their own homes." It made a decent soundbite. By that evening, the clip had racked up over 700,000 views and the subreddit had declared it Karenageddon. I never asked for the nickname, but I wasn't going to argue with result. Back in the neighborhood, things were changing. The HOA board resigned en masse 2 days after the hearing. Karen had tried to call an emergency meeting, but only 3 people showed up, and 2 of them were there just to laugh at her. Then came the recall petition, pushed by none other than Ms. Randall, who had decided she was tired of knitting quietly while tyrants ruled the block. With the HOA charter suspended and its finances frozen, there wasn't much left to do. A week later, the county clerk dissolved the HOA entirely. Poof. Just like that, a reign of terror ended. Karen, however, wasn't quite finished embarrassing herself. She tried to sue me for emotional distress, claimed I'd sabotaged her career and manipulated the trust to frame her. Her lawyer must have been scraping the bottom of the barrel because the complaint was laughably weak. Lou filed a counterclaim for defamation and abuse of process and requested a formal psychiatric evaluation. Karen dropped the suit within days. Then came the foreclosure. Turns out Karen had taken out a second mortgage on her home, probably to fund her little real estate adventure, and when the fraud charges started piling up, her bank wanted nothing to do with it. She missed 3 payments and that was it. Her house went up for auction in a whisper sale process that barely got announced. Guess who bought it? Not me. That would have been too obvious. No, I had Lou create an LLC under an unrelated name, and that LLC bought the house for just under market value. We didn't even need to outbid anyone. No one wanted the scandal-ridden property. When Karen found out, she snapped. I don't know how she pieced it together. Maybe she saw me standing on the porch with a coffee mug one morning, but she screamed from across the street like she'd just seen a ghost. I just raised the mug and said, "Welcome to the neighborhood." Again. She tried to come back once, tried to talk to me, tried to plead that she was misled, and just trying to help the community. I let her talk for exactly 1 minute, then said, "You broke into my house, sold it to strangers, and forged documents. The only thing you helped was my lawyer's career." Then I shut the door. The cherry on top came a few weeks later. I was planting some flowers out front, something I hadn't done since this whole mess began, when Ms. Randall walked up with a brown paper package. Inside was a hand-knitted sweater with the words, "Not today, Karen," stitched across the front in bold red letters. I wore it that evening while watering the lawn. Several neighbors stopped to wave. One even brought over cookies. Turns out being the guy who takes down a rogue HOA president makes you sort of a local legend. But just when I thought the story was over, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photo. Blazer Man, this time in front of another suburban development on the other side of the state. Written on the back in neat handwriting were 4 words. You stopped one node. I don't know who sent it. Maybe someone on the inside. Maybe just a warning. But it confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Karen wasn't the queen. She was just a rook. And the board was a lot bigger than I thought. So now I still live in my house. It's quiet again. Peaceful. The neighborhood has settled down. But I've upgraded the security system. I've got cameras where no one can see them. And the trust that owns my property? Let's just say it has a few more layers now. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like Karen don't just disappear. They evolve. They find new homes, new targets, new ways to weasel into power. And the people behind them? The ones in the shadows, in the suits, in the photos with politicians? They don't stop unless you make them. So I'm waiting, watching. And the next time they try something like this, I won't just trap the rook. I'll take the king.